Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's DSD DESIS Lab talk. It's been a while since we've had one of these, so thank you for being here, and I hope you guys enjoy it. Um, Today's theme or topic is Unequal Stories, Exploring Gender Diversity in Creative Disciplines Through Speculative Design. This falls within August being Women's Month, so we are kind of sticking to that theme. There are two sections to today's talk. The first one will be given by myself, Ashton Moseley, talking a little bit about Unequal Stories, the actual research project that we're busy working on in collaboration with Falmouth University in the UK. I have spoken about that at a session last year, so it's just a little bit of an update on what we've been up to since then. And then part two of the presentation is presented by Kimberly from the Fashion Design Department. Who's also involved in Unequal Stories, but she's going to talk a little bit more about speculative design using a project that she has recently done with her students, sort of kind of talking about the outcomes and showing you what they got up to. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoy. So as I mentioned, part one of today's talk is me presenting a little bit about unequal stories, researching gender equality in design disciplines. So Unequal Stories is a collaborative GCRF-funded research project that's taking place between Falmouth University in the UK and the University of Johannesburg in South Africa. The project is guided by Sustainable Development Goal number 5, which is gender equality. And basically, it's a cross-national comparative research project that aims to explore gender diversity, equality, and representation across various design disciplines within higher education and industry. So this research project was prompted by an analysis of statistical data surrounding gender diversity in design disciplines, particularly a recent study by the British Design Council in 2018, which identified that while 63% of all UK art and design graduates are female, the UK's design workforce is only 22% female. And that's also, you can compare that to the wider workforce, which is 53 to 47% female. um, yeah, pretty disturbing stats, and they were influenced by sort of pretty extreme gender imbalances in disciplines such as architecture, multimedia, and industrial design. But this sort of study and similar studies to this were kind of the starting point of this project a couple of years back. Similar statistics have been identified in other countries, such as Australia and the United States. And while some quantitative data of this nature is available in South Africa, it is significantly outdated. The most recent sort of stats or study into the topic was from 2008. So while the quantitative data might indicate that there are various systemic issues impacting gender equality in design industries, this kind of quantitative data does little to shed light on why this is the case. So we felt that by conducting a narrative inquiry around attitudes and perceptions of gender, by participants, both sort of students currently studying towards a qualification, as well as professionals that are currently working in industry, we hope that by gathering their kind of experiences and narratives, that those stories will reveal some kind of core issues impacting equality in the design industries, and we can use those insights to then take further steps in some kind of meaningful interventions. So again, for those of you that are maybe unfamiliar with the project and the work that we've been doing, I'm going to take you guys back 12 months to Women's Month 2019. So in the early stages of this gender and design research project, during Women's Month, so August 2019, we ran a kind of early pilot data gathering exercise. So most of you from FADA will hopefully remember the exhibition that was running throughout the entire month of August last year. Basically what we did was, in an attempt to sort of gain more of like experiential or like narrative stories of students' experiences and opinions and insights into the topic of gender related to design, we ran this sort of interactive installation thing throughout the month where we provided a series of these colorful cards. So there was a series of about 5 of them. Each of them had a different prompter word on the front. So you can see there was gender, culture, confidence, representation, and gender bias. On the back of these colorful cards, there were little tick boxes to indicate the student's gender, so male, female, and non-binary, the department and discipline, and the year of study. So there was no names or anything; it was completely anonymous. And then a sort of broad question related to that prompt to word, like how has your gender affected your confidence as a design student, for example. So students were basically encouraged to fill out these cards, share their experiences, whether they felt that it was an issue or not, positive or negative. And once they had written on those cards, they pinned them up onto a sort of suspended net in the middle of our FADA atrium. Um, and this kind of continued throughout the month. Each week we introduced a new card, a new word, and through the use of like departmental Instagram accounts and the FADA Instagram and everything, we kind of ran this campaign through the month. So we ran this exact same exhibition or installation at both institutions throughout Women's Month. Falmouth did it a little bit later and a little bit shorter, but the exact same cards, the exact same sort of social media like promotion and stuff like that took place at both institutions. At FADA, this all culminated in like this really cool open exhibition at the end of August, where we sort of during lunchtime, I think on a Friday, we had this kind of event in the atrium. So this installation, so the hanging net, people were invited to come around, we'll have a walk around, read them, and we also displayed a number of other projects kind of suited to the theme. So Kim ran a project with her students in fashion, this really cool sort of like t-shirt design challenge where sort of groups of students had to kind of challenge or sort of speak to these kind of gender stereotypes through like really expressive sort of visual expression on the t-shirts. Posters from the graphic design department with Krista. So every Women's Month, Krista does a great project where the students create these kind of digital portraits of iconic female figures. So those were exhibited, as well as a number of other projects that students had done kind of independently related to gender and gender stereotypes and equality and stuff like that. And it was a really cool event. It came together really nicely, and it was just a nice way to kind of sum up the month and all the work that kind of went into this sort of initiative. So the point of today's talk, now that I'm kind of getting to the point, is to basically fill you in on what we've been doing since August 2019 up till today, sort of towards the end of August 2020. So firstly, I'd like to just acknowledge the people that are involved in the project. So like I said, it is a collab between the University of Johannesburg and Falmouth, and the kind of main facilitators and researchers involved are myself and Kimberly, as well as Angus Campbell, HOD of Industrial Design. From Falmouth, we've got Robin Cook heading it up. So she used to work at FADA in the graphic design department, but she's now at Falmouth. As well as David Pryor and Brian Clark, who are from the communications. Well, Brian is from the communications department, and David is sort of from the research area. And then we've got a few other people involved, such as Florence, who has just come on board. She is a designer who focuses on speculative and Afrofuturism. Which we're quite excited to get her on board, and I'll talk about that a bit later. Wendy Dixon, so the design team involved in kind of creating the visual identity of Unequal Stories, which I'll show you soon, and Steve, who is the web developer, who I will also mention just now. So since last Women's Month with that exhibition, shortly after that, Kim and I actually took a trip to Falmouth to meet with the Falmouth team. We were there for a few days, kind of reviewing all of the data that we had collected through that installation and the feedback, and had lots of brainstorms, basically trying to figure out what we actually wanted to do with this project, how we were going to move it forward, and what it was going to look like. During that visit, we, after running in circles for quite a few days, finally kind of pinned it down to what we were wanting to do, being a continuing this idea of gathering these kind of qualitative insights, this kind of narrative data, both from higher education and industry in South Africa and the UK, and having this kind of small scale pilot project, which we hope to kind of scale up later on, which I'll discuss in a later slide. So the first step really was to develop some kind of branding or identity for the project, because we knew that there was going to be a interactive website element to the project as the kind of platform of data gathering. And given the audience that we were targeting, so designers, it's a mixture of design students, design professionals, as well as academics, we felt it was really important to get a really well considered, well designed visual look and feel and story and narrative of the project itself, in order to kind of get buy-in from the audience that we were targeting. So we spent a lot of time with Wendy Dixon and her team. I say we did, they spent a lot of time developing really beautiful options of the potential identity, and through various sort of Zoom discussions and presentations we've narrowed it down. This is the logo, Unequal Stories, and there's a whole bunch of other visual stuff, which if we've got time afterwards, I can maybe show you. But from that, we then started developing the website itself with Steve, which is something that I will show you a few sort of screenshots of as well. And then the final component was actually starting to write up the brief component. So there's various aspects to the project, being the identity, the website of the data gathering, and then actually taking all of that data and kind of throwing that at students and people in industry and asking them to respond to that data through a speculative design project. So we've been busy with developing the identity, creating the website, and writing the brief, and those are the kind of things that I'm going to be briefly showing you today. So quite briefly, the main objectives of our study is first to assess gender diversity, equality, and representation across different creative disciplines, both in higher education and industry, specifically in the UK and South Africa, so the kind of contrast between global north, global south. We want to explore the attitudes and perceptions towards gender across those different disciplines, identify possible themes and insights that might sort of point towards potential problems or opportunities for future intervention, compare and contrast the findings cross-culturally, so across the two different, very different sort of contexts, and then finally, as I said, respond to those findings through pedagogic and or industry interventions, which in this case is a student project. So the first step of this research project is really the data gathering, and our goal is to gather both quantitative and qualitative data, and we're going to do that through sort of two main phases or methods. So the first one is the Unequal Stories website. So the website that has been developed, and I'll share with you shortly, will be shared with both design students and industry professionals, and participants will be asked to share their stories anonymously. This data will, so the stories that will be written up will then be shared on this really cool like map visualization, which I'll show you, which will not only allow participants to kind of like share their stories, but also see what other people have written, both from like a student perspective, industry, in the different contexts. So it's like a really cool gathering and sharing platform. Then once that's been done, or once it's kind of started, that website will then become this kind of resource that feeds into a student project. So students from design departments in South Africa and the UK will kind of uncover and share further insights in both contexts using the Unequal Stories brief and toolkit, which is the other thing that we've been developing. So this toolkit will basically be shared via the website, and the sort of educators or students will be asked to respond to the data, so the data that's been collected through the website, as well as other resources that will be shared to kind of respond to that data using a speculative design approach, which Kim will talk about later. And the outcomes of those projects from both institutions, from the various disciplines, will then be shared and kind of showcased on the online gallery on that same website. So it's this kind of feeding in and out through this website platform, which is really exciting, or at least we think so. So first, I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about the website, show you some screenshots of the early kind of development, what it looks like, and how it's going to work. So if you go to the Unequal Stories website, this is the kind of landing page where you've got the logo, the branding, a little bit of a kind of in-your-face opening statement that kind of really frames the project and the topic, and kind of draws one's interest. If you see on the sort of top right hand corner, there's various tabs. So the map, participate, stories, collaborate, about, and research. So if you click on the About tab, that's kind of the more, the less exciting information maybe for some of the students, but it's like the background information into the Unequal Stories project as a whole from a more academic point of view, who's involved, what the goal is, etc. After viewing the landing page, there's an option to press participate, or if you click on the participate tab, that brings you to a page that looks something like this. Now, obviously, with the nature of the subject and the telling of stories and sharing of insights, it's really important that participants have the ability to remain anonymous. So, again, to kind of bring in the creative aspect, instead of having a photo of yourself or personal details, but still wanting some kind of like unique identifier, I think, to kind of be able to later kind of see the mark that you've left on the website, your kind of stamp. Participants are given the opportunity to, so it says, without words, how would you see yourself? How do you describe shapes and sort of drawing tools? Each participant creates a little visual identifier of themselves. They can pick their colors, the shapes, whatever, and there's also the option to create random things if you don't want to do it yourself. So that's kind of the little identifier that will show up when people are viewing your story, which I think is quite cool. It's still completely anonymous, but you can also kind of know which one is yours, which is quite nice. Then on the right hand side, participants will also put in their sort of name, email, country, whether they're a student or in industry, that kind of information that won't be displayed on the website, but it's something from the back end. So, in future, if we need to take down a post or whatever, we're able to kind of track it that way. So it's the less exciting stuff, but that's kind of how someone would get started. After creating the kind of little visual identifier, the participants will be presented with some kind of sort of statistics and a question saying basically, share your narrative or your experiences with us. And in the little sort of text box, people can then share their story, agree to terms and conditions, confirm they're not a robot, etc. So this is basically the opportunity for them to just share their stories in a written format. So after the participant has sort of shared their story, this kind of little thank you will pop up, and then if you see in the fine print, they're kind of asking for sort of if people are willing to answer further questions. That's still coming up, but it's basically a list of specific questions that we have thought about just to kind of paint a full picture, which can then be kind of compared more from like a quantitative point of view. But yeah, so people will then have the opportunity to answer questions if they want to. If they don't want to, they don't have to. They can then click on other stories, which will then take them to the next slide. So by clicking on that stories little button or on the stories tab at the top, you basically have this whole list of stories, which you can see again the little visual identifier, and then an indication of sort of country, location, male or female, and like age range. And yeah, you can then kind of scroll through and see what everyone has written. But apart from this, there's also the kind of cool visualization aspect, which I will show you now. So basically, this is the idea, and it's still in progress because poor Steve, the web developer, is racking his brain trying to get this right. But basically, if you click on the map tab at the top, all of the stories will be plotted onto this kind of map visualization. So the red showing the United Kingdom, the blue showing South Africa, and this idea of like pulling these lines between them, like stories that kind of match up or have similar themes or keywords and stuff like that. And the idea is that if you kind of hover your cursor over any one of those dots, it will sort of expand and you can kind of see a snippet of what that story says, who it was by, whatever. And if you want to know more, you can click on the read more button. And when you do that, it kind of expands more. You can read the whole story. You see the little sort of visual identifier. And yeah, and that's how you can kind of scroll through, see all the different things that have been plotted, but from like a very visual point of view, so you can kind of see the difference in context and stuff like that. So that's really exciting. So not only is that map like just a really cool way of visualizing data, but what happens is that map and the website itself becomes this really cool tool that is going to feed into the next step, which is this collaborate project, both in higher education with the students, as well as something that can be sent out to industry. So if you click on the Collaborate tab, this little message pops up. So alongside the quantitative research, we're producing a series of citizen researcher toolkits to encourage students and industry to engage with the stories through a speculative design project. And if you want to participate, please download the toolkit. So then, depending on if you're in industry or if you're an educator, you can downlink, you can click on the PDF and you download this whole toolkit. So we're first starting obviously with the student one, which is something I'm going to talk about today. And then once that's done, we will develop something that will be sent out to industry as well. So yeah, so now I'm going to tell you a little bit about the brief and the toolkit that we've been developing. We've sent all of the information across to Wendy and the design team, and they are busy putting it together and making it look beautiful. So I don't have the actual brief, but I can tell you a little bit about the content and what we are wanting to do with the project. So the toolkit includes sort of four main things. So a note to the educators, a little bit of background into the project, the brief, as well as a bunch of learning material. So the brief itself kind of outlines the project requirements, and there's four of them. So the first one is using ethnographic methodology, students are required to deepen their understanding of gender equality within their design disciplines. Students are required to analyze and compare cross-national data, so the data that is sort of showcased on the website, as well as sort of research that they would do themselves. They would then use a speculative design approach to respond to that data, and the outcomes of the project would ultimately be shared and showcased in like an online gallery on the Unequal Stories website. So the project brief has been structured around the double diamond sort of method or methodology that everyone kind of knows, or the process. So there's four phases to the project. Phase one being discover. So that's the gathering inspiration and insights. So by following this like ethnographic approach. The specific methods would include exploring the Unequal Stories website, reading the reading pack, watching the pre-recorded lectures, as well as conducting further desktop and field research. The second phase being define, so that's the kind of definition phase where the students would have to kind of analyze and compare all the data that had been given to them and gathered by them. Phase three being develop, so through a sort of critical or speculative approach or response. Those responses are imagined, conceptualized, prototyped, etc. And then the final phase being deliver. So that's basically when the ideas are realized and the outcomes are sort of shown through photographs, concept drawings, videos, whatever it is, for that different discipline, and then sort of showcased on the website.
So the toolkit is going to consist of, or include rather, a whole bunch of different sort of learning material and resources. So the 4 main categories are as follows. So the first one is the website. So all of the stories that are shared on there, the map, the various other resources. So all the information on the website will be a pretty sort of data thick resource. Then there's going to be a series of 4 lectures, so pre-recorded lecture presentations. So the first one, an introduction and contextualization to like the overall project. So that's going to be given by Kim. A presentation on gender and design statistics, so all the stats that are available from all over the world. I'll present that one. Then there's going to be one about speculative design by Robin Cook, our sort of key partner in the UK from Falmouth. And then finally a guest lecture from Florence about Afrofuturism. So that was actually a pretty recent addition to the project. We've had some discussions, and we were a bit concerned that most of the content that was being shared and the kind of general tone of the project was very Eurocentric, and just the authors and stuff that were being included, and the subject matter and stuff. So we thought that the idea of incorporating Afrofuturism as like another layer to this project to kind of like correlate with speculative design could be quite cool. So we're still factoring that in and making it work, but that's going to be one of the lectures, which will be particularly insightful, especially for the students in the UK who, Robin has kind of identified as being very white, middle class, like privileged, and their kind of insights into this stuff is very limited. So then there's going to be a reading pack. So we've each selected a series of like specific readings that are related to the topic. So like ethnographic research, speculative design, gender and design, Afrofuturism, etc. So those readings are provided in a pack, and then we also provide a whole list of links to further resources and like additional reading if the students want to read that. So this briefing toolkit has been designed to be as open and flexible as possible, to kind of allow for a range of responses and approaches that are suited to the varying needs and schedules of each of the institutions, departments, and modules. The brief also allows educators and students to pursue either sort of discipline-specific or transdisciplinary, cross-disciplinary work. You can choose to do it as a group project or an individual project. And also, because we've constructed this project in phases, the project could be run as a sprint, so across 4 days, or slightly longer, across 4 weeks, or if you wanted to do it as a 4-month project, that's also fine. So there really is a lot of flexibility, and ultimately we just hope that students and educators are able to share their findings and insights and responses as a way of enabling further discussion on design and gender inequality in the design disciplines from the kind of cross-national perspective.
So that's kind of what we've been up to for the past 12 months, sort of defining the identity, building this website, putting together the brief, figuring it all out. And next steps, moving into the 3rd year of the project, into 2020. Basically, the next step is now to run the project. So we're hoping to run the 4-week project at an honors level across the faculty. The project is going to take place in November at Falmouth, and the first term of 2021 at UJ.
So ultimately, once these projects have been completed and a similar projects have taken place in industry, so uploading and sharing all of those outcomes on the website, we'll just add another really interesting layer in forms of data gathering. And once all that's done, we're hoping to write it all up, publish journals, conferences, get some nice sort of publishing out of this. And then again, come full circle and actually share that publishing or those publications on this website as further resources. And at the end of the day, what we're really hoping for is using this project as like a really great pilot, like a really cool example of what this project could be, and then use it as a way to apply for further funding, where we can then scale this up, do it all over the world, so not just the 2 countries or contexts. And yeah, that's kind of what we're hoping for.
And that's it. So that's Unequal Stories in a nutshell, the kind of where we're at, where we're hoping to go with it. I hope you guys are as excited about it as we are. And for those of you that are FADA lecturers in the audience that don't already know about the project but would be interested in running this with your students next year, yeah, we would really appreciate your participation, and let us know if you're interested. And yeah.
And that's it.
Great, thanks so much for that, Ashton. That was a really super presentation. I think let's just move straight on to Kimberly's, and then we can keep all questions until the end. Kimberly, are you ready to run?
Yes, I am. Thanks, Angus. Right, can everyone see my screen?
Yep, we can.
Perfect. All right, so as Ashton has already given an overview to the Unequal Stories research project, my part of the presentation will be focusing more on the exploration of gender diversity through speculative design. So one of the key, I think, kind of words that come up for me when looking at the literature around speculative design is the changing of perspective. And the quote on the current slide is taken from Dan and Rabi's Speculative Everything. And it states that when people think of design, most believe it is about problem solving. Even the more expressive forms of design are about solving aesthetic problems. Faced with huge challenges such as gender inequality, overpopulation, water shortages, and climate change, designers feel an overpowering urge to work together to fix them, as though they can be broken down, quantified, and solved. Design's inherent optimism leaves no alternative, but it is becoming clear that many of the challenges we face today are unfixable, and that the only way to overcome them is by changing our values, beliefs, attitudes, and behavior. So the definition of speculative design, according to Dunn and Rabi, is the focus on thriving on imagination, where the aim is to open up new perspectives, create spaces for discussion and debate about alternative ways of being, and design speculations that act as a catalyst for collectively redefining our relationship to reality. So the diagram visually depicts a mapping, I would say, of speculative design within the creative and design space, almost resembling a spectrum from the one side, which is the unconstrained, to the constrained, and how speculative design is placed in the middle of the spectrum, and it merges creativity, imagination, expression with design thinking, and developing through critical design, design fiction, and designing futures. And when it comes to the speculative design project between the University of Johannesburg and Falmouth under Unequal Stories, we found that the approach of speculative design best suited the exploratory nature of the Unequal Stories research project. So we're all aware that design disciplines have a slightly different approach and different design specializations, as well as their own ways of working, but there are some general activities or the process that is followed that is common to all designers. So as Ashton has already mentioned, the double diamond model developed by the Design Council visually communicates this general process. And it's divided, of course, into 4 distinct phases, and they are discover, define, develop, and deliver. And it maps how the design process passes from points where thinking and possibilities are as broad as possible to situations where they are deliberately narrowed down and focused on distinct objectives. And I think for me, this visual of all these words listed with traditional design and speculative design kind of shows the difference when it comes to speculative design and within the outcomes. So how with speculative design, there always seems to be this focus on a social narrative or a social problem that's trying to be unpacked or analyzed, and how design is used as a medium to address or discuss with the aim to influence perspectives, values, beliefs, attitudes, and behavior. So with relation to the speculative design approach, Dan and Rabi approach designing for the future by employing a cone system where one can explore either possible futures, plausible futures, preferable, as well as probable. And I'll be breaking down each cone and accompanying these explanations with a few assignment examples done by the second year BA fashion design students. So just to kind of give a bit of context into the assignment, it was titled Imagining Gender Equality in 100 Years, and we did it this year in the first semester. And using one of the 4 cones as a lens, the students were required to imagine a future 100 years from now where there is no gender inequality. So the assignment was made up of 2 parts, and part A was the visual depiction of your imagined situation 100 years from now where there is no gender inequality, and part B was the write-up where the students had to first introduce the cone that they used to kind of explore this speculative design. And the second part of the write-up was where they gave a description and an explanation behind their design or their visual, and the symbols and the meaning behind the different components of that visual. So the key driving statistic for this project was how the overall global gender gap will close in 99.5 years. Over the course of the year, so this year, the students have been introduced to topics related to gender and design, and in some cases more specifically looking at fashion design. For example, the perpetuation of stereotypes that fashion often portrays, as well as how fashion can be used as a medium to change these narratives related to gender, which speaks to a more accurate, inclusive depiction of society. So some of the questions put forward to the students were, what will changing values, beliefs, attitudes, and behavior related to issues of gender look like? And how can I use my design skills to create or imagine spaces in the present for discussion and debate about alternative ways of being in a conceivable or imagined future? So now looking at the cones and some of the project examples that the students submitted. The first cone is the possible cone, which makes a link between today's world and the suggested one. When exploring in the space of a possible future, it is important that the scenario is scientifically possible, as well as there should be a path from where we are today to where we are in this imagined scenario. So this student's concept was sparked from her experience with filling out personal information on her child's daycare application form and noticing the rigidity and very traditional format of the required information. The student stated that as a single mom, registering my son at a preschool was a tricky process. When we were being interviewed for admission, they expected a father figure to be present. Schools in this area prefer to admit children that come from nuclear families. Children who come from broken households are seen as a red flag. Same-sex marriages are seen as unnatural and sinful. Assume that all households have father figures in an LGBTQI generation is not inclusive. To assume that every household requires a man and a woman in order for it to be a home is disclusionary of individuals who do not fit this criteria. So the image, as she states, she created is a creche application form that she imagined in the near future. I have named the creche Ingomso, which is a Xhosa word for tomorrow or future. The rainbow logo symbolizes unity amongst the human race. It also incorporates the LGBTQI community flag colors, a future that accommodates everyone that the way they are or how they choose to be. And then she continues to communicate how she made sure to include a section for a second mother or second father and a section for other, as blended families do exist. The parts highlighted in orange are the new additions to the otherwise traditional application form. And children should be allowed, as she says, to use their mother's surname or both parents' surnames. So just kind of speculating what this plausible future would look like in relation to preschool application forms. The next one is plausible. So the plausible cone is kind of the space of scenario planning and foresight, the space of what could happen. The space of plausible futures is not about prediction, but exploring alternative socioeconomic and political futures to ensure preparedness for a number of different futures. So the image on the right-hand side of the slide basically speaks to how the student has intersected the possible cone and the plausible cone, and they came up with an imagined visual which represents a preferable gender equality planet, where they traced a world map to illustrate continents, countries, and the ocean. On the map, there is a gender equality scale to indicate broken gender boundaries. And the student mentions how they used the color pink to kind of speak more to the male statistics on the map, and the color blue to represent the female statistics on the map. So just a kind of zoomed in visual of the student submission. So the planet is made up of 5 forces representing 5 continents, excluding Antarctica. The newly formed forces or planets addresses different changes related to political, human rights, and economic or cultural and social factors. So just an example, so in the South Pacific region, we have South Human Rights Force, and over there it has been reported that 0 rape cases reported in the past 11 months. So these are all just speculative, imagined facts. There's no kind of truth to what is being portrayed here, but kind of speaking to the possibilities within the lens of the 2 cones that the student selected. And then moving on to the preferable. So the preferable cone intersects and lies within the probable and plausible. This is the cone of preferable futures. The objective of this cone is not to try and predict the future, but in using design to open up all sorts of possibilities that can be discussed, debated, and used to collectively define a preferable future. So a short extract from the student's assignment. So she states that the woman depicted in the image is bold because she is any and every woman. She is inclusive of all the women who identify as women, regardless of their anatomy. Her eyes are bright to represent how women 100 years from now are seen and are true equals. The golden neck piece speaks to the wealth that women bring when they bring themselves to the table, whilst the brokenness of it represents the unshackling of women from cultural and societal ideas and norms. Women no longer have to be an image of a rock, and the student makes reference to the phrase "watinta abafazi, watinta imbokodo," which stands for, which means when you strike a woman, you strike a rock. They no longer define themselves on how much pain they can endure. The red and orange hues speak to the rising of a new sun on African women, a new era of hope and progress. Another example of the preferable from another student. So the student mentions, introduces the card game that she created, which is titled Let's Talk Gender. And she states that it has been designed to impact how gender equality is viewed leading up to the to the 100 years, but also to be able to be used in 100 years. So the idea of this game is to be played amongst 2 or more people. It's for individuals to answer the questions presented on the cards that can lead to discussions or sharing of personal experiences. The game's questions work on 3 levels of difficulties. Level 1 works on perception. This level aims to get the genders, different genders, to discuss their perception of the other gender, what thoughts they have or what they believe the opposite gender has that they do not. An example of a question is, what assumptions have you made about the opposite gender that later was proven untrue? Level 2 works on connection. This level aims for a player to open up and share deep and personal thoughts, ideas, and experiences. An example of a question is, imagine yourself in a woman's shoes. How would you feel walking past a group of men alone? And level 3 focuses on reflection. So this allows the players to reflect on their newfound knowledge from the game. An example question is, what is one thing you think children should be taught from a young age about gender? The final card step may be chosen by individual players to give another handwritten card containing a personal message. And the probable cone. So with this one, there were no submissions where the students kind of explored speculative design using this cone. But the probable cone is where most designers operate. It describes what is likely to happen unless there is some extreme upheaval, such as financial crash, eco-disaster, or even a global pandemic like the one we're in now. Most design methods, processes, tools acknowledged good practice, and even design education are oriented towards the space. So just a reflection on the project that I did with the second years in semester 1. Most of the students did represent their designs with the rhetoric of kind of this, we see in 100 years, 50% male, 50% female, or just kind of this like equal split between the genders in 100 years from now when it comes to the workplace. And I think realistically, possibly that is not, realistically something that could happen. But I think when looking at gender equality and considering all the intersectionalities related to gender, what we are more likely to see is this kind of freedom of choice or the ungendering of these professional roles, and there is no kind of link to one's gender when taking up these roles in different spaces within communities. So that was just kind of the observation from the project that I did. But I think going forward with the Unequal Stories Speculative Design project that we aim to do with the BA Honours students at UJ and at Falmouth, I think we're kind of really looking forward to seeing just the culmination of these speculative designs and what exactly the students are going to come up with, as we did kind of leave it very broad in terms of what the outcome will look like. So yeah, that brings me to the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Great.
Kimmy.
Thank you so much, Kimberly. That was really super. I think what we'll do now is open up the sort of floor to any comments or questions or observations or any input that anybody has from the 2 presentations that we've had. And obviously you can direct your questions to either Ashton or Kimberly, and they can both then respond. Has anybody got anything that they would like to ask or suggest or comment on?
Angus, sorry, I don't know where to put my hand up.
It's fine, go for it, Nashane, you're the only one speaking.
Thank you very much, Angus. I just want to compliment Kimberly and Ashton, and of course, under your leadership. I think that as 2 young emerging academics, they have done a brilliant job on this. It's a very interesting area of design to pursue, and well done to Kimberly and Ashton. I'm very proud of the both of you.
Thank you, Nashane.
Thanks, Shane.
Any other comments?
I have not a comment, but a question. Just when is the project going to end at some stage? So are you working towards still another year or another iteration or something, and then it's over? I might have missed that in your presentation. Sorry, Ashton, you might have.
No, it's no problem. So the original project or the funding through the GCRF was for 3 years. So we decided to use that funding to basically execute a pilot project that we can then use as an example to apply for further funding. So we are now at the end of the 2nd year. So moving from now to like August 2021 will be the 3rd and final year. So by the end of that, we want to have at least executed these projects with the students at least once, get a few industry responses, and do a bit of publishing. And then we're already sort of looking, so like David Pryor in the UK, who's kind of the research person, he's, they're already looking for possible bids that we can use this as just a prototype basically to apply for bigger funding. And what we really want to do is basically upscale what we're doing to a more global or more widespread, so some South America, North America, Australia, like getting a much broader picture starting to go. So yeah, so that's kind of the idea, if that answers your question.
Thanks. Yeah, so there's actually, there's no end to it as such. I mean, you'll see where it goes and then
exactly
grow it as it needs to or whatever. Okay.
Yeah, that's what we're hoping to do. And then also now that being part of the WDO Young Designer Circle, we've started having sort of quite a few discussions about, what we want to do as the YDC, what sort of the focus areas are in terms of sustainable development goals. And I've kind of been punting the gender equality stuff, and a lot of them are really interested in that. So we're going to sort of be discussing this topic on that level as well, and then hopefully we'll be able to start kind of crossing over and feeding into each other's projects and stuff like that. So yeah, there's lots of different potential avenues we can grow this thing. So yeah.
Yeah, I think also just to add a bit of I think Des, what we tried to do at the beginning, and I think this is the Falmouth team were very strategic to make sure that I suppose the funding, it was a relatively small amount of funding that was put aside. So it was, well, how can we get as much value as possible out of the funding that we have to end up with something within 3 years that's going to be able to then show, I suppose, potential significant impact, and then be able to use that for a sort of further funding application. So the funding itself has been very much, has been very strategically targeted towards setting up this website that then becomes a resource that stays, and so that the project itself doesn't just kind of disappear into the ether, that it is, something that then, I suppose has multiple replications and ripples through the design world. And then I also just want to respond to Amira's comment, because Amira, she made a comment on the group chat and said, well done, interesting project. The inclusion of other voices seems to be an afterthought. I really enjoy the idea of what will gender equality look like and the use of fiction to conceptualize that. Well done. I think the response to the inclusion of other voices as an afterthought was part of the process of developing the project, in that there was this clear sort of problem between the fact that all the funding came from the UK, and this funding stream is a development fund. So it's all about this idea of sort of developmental research, which is, again, is quite problematic sort of from a colonial perspective. So we brought this very much to the table and said, we've got to make sure that, that the project itself does bring with it an understanding of these two very different contexts, and also the implication of how the UK actually, affected South Africa in its past. I think that, Ashton's description of you're bringing in Afrofuturism is just kind of a furthering of that, and I suppose more a concrete way. But I think that strategically from our side, it's been very much about this. I suppose the roles of power in relation to the way that academic projects play out, particularly when the purse strings are held by a sort of colonial power. So I hope that maybe in some ways answers that that comment that you asked. And then Carol, I saw that you were going to ask something.
No, not.
Okay. Any other questions or comments though?
Yeah, I have another question, because it's interesting there now that your start with the survey last year happened in both spaces, but something like your project, Kim, do you know if that's going to be replicated on that side? Because it'd be interesting to see what that brings as well.
Well, the project that I ran with the second years was just kind of something that I thought of as we were putting together this toolkit for the Unequal Stories. So it's not actually something that I think I've even made Robin, who's from Falmouth, aware of. So yeah, I guess it would be interesting to kind of see that develop. And I think we will see that as well in with the Unequal Stories Speculative Design project, but just at an honours level.
Nishane has her hand up.
Thank you. I figured it out. Just, is it possible for DESIS to hold the different sessions that Ashton spoke about via platforms such as that, the Speculative Design by Robin and the Afrofuturism? Will DESIS host that on such a platform?
Well, yeah, maybe to answer that question, I don't know. We haven't quite got there yet, but I mean, I think that these would be quite important, sort of broader lectures of relevance to wider design disciplines. So I would hope that they would be translated. I mean, I think that we've got multiple strategies that are happening. So it's the projects themselves, in the sense of engaging students and getting them to be part of the process. But then also, obviously, as both sort of academic institutions trying to push research agendas to engage, sort of wider, sort of the wider academy. But yeah, I think it would be a good suggestion to have those sort of 4 lectures to be hosted by DESIS, the DESIS Lab, so that we can share it more broadly. Thanks for that.
Yes, Angus, my second question is I'm quite curious. I know Kimberly ran this project with fashion, and fashion is a discipline that's kind of almost more female orientated than male orientated. I'm quite curious to know if this runs, across disciplines, the different perspectives from the different design disciplines, and how that pans out. So I'm quite eager to hear about the honors project, because that's a broader kind of design discipline with both male and females. The other dynamic that I'm quite interested in is when you brought up the kind of dynamic between male and female. I'm also quite curious to know the dynamics between educators and students, and how that actually plans out.
Ashton, are you trying to say something?
No.
Oh.
So then I agree. I think what's cool about this project is that there's so many different layers to it, and there's so many levels at which it could lead to like interesting findings in terms of like the difference between how the South African students interpret it compared to the UK, how the honours students interpret it compared to Kim's second year students, how the male students interpret it compared compared to the female students, how the different disciplines interpret it. I think it's like, it's so cool, and there's so much like room. And what's nice about it is that we've left it open so that, you know, we aren't shutting out any of those possible outcomes and findings and stuff. So I'm also interested, Nishane, to see how that plays out.
Thank you, Ashton.
Super. Are there any final questions or comments? Doesn't seem like it. So I would just like to say, on behalf of the DESIS Lab and the DSD DESIS Lab, thanks very much, Ashton and Kimberly, for your presentations. I think it was really super to be taken through the project, and I suppose, to understand that the process that we've gone through to get to this point. And I think it's really exciting to see how it plays out. I believe that the website's going to be going live relatively soon. So the minute that it does, we will share it with everyone. And then thank you for all of you for joining us, some of you from different places in the world. It's really wonderful to be able to use these sorts of platforms to connect with others. And I hope that you all got something out of this. And I also hope that you all have a wonderful weekend. As we were all discussing right at the beginning of the session, you know, it's sort of these lockdown realities make work sort of seem like it never ends, and weekends just kind of merge into days. And I hope you have a good break. And yeah, I think this was a very apt presentation for Women's Month in South Africa. And that you got something from this that you can take back into your own teaching or into your own design work. Yeah, thanks again for joining.
Angus, can you just quickly tell us when's the next one, and what is the topic of the next one?
So the next session, I believe, is planned for the 25th, if I'm not mistaken. Let me just quickly get onto here. No, it's not the 25th. It is the 18th of September, and it will be a session with two of our postdoctoral researchers in the faculty, and they will be exploring the fourth industrial revolution and its impact on design from two quite different perspectives. One from sort of an educational perspective, exploring a curriculum in the bricks, and the other one from sort of a more visual graphic sense. And sort of the role that technology plays there. So it will be shared through our mailing list and on our Facebook page. And those of you that have joined this session for the first time and are not aware of the DESIS Lab, please go through to our website, or you can sign up to our mailer. Our website is www.designsocietydevelopment.org. And then you can be kept up to date with what happens in the future. And then we're going to have two other seminars before the end of the year, which I think are both also going to be quite exciting, and those will be also shared closer to the time.